One aspect of the alien plan is to share their technology with us, but gradually so as not to disrupt our civilization. By now, there must be more than 100 books on the crash in 1947 of an alien ship at Roswell, New Mexico. Here are excerpts providing some essential details of the crash. Whitley Strieber writes, "The crash was not an accident, it was a donation. They want us to figure things out on our own, to be independent, self-sufficient companions." Cooper claims to have seen one of the Roswell crashes and writes, "The disturbed soil was about 100 feet in diameter. When it crashed at about a 30-degree angle, it pushed all the earth back away from the craft itself. My best thought of this rather strange hole is that some kind of magnetic field had pushed all the earth away from the craft at impact." Cooper continued, "The piece of physical evidence that I held in my hand was a material that I really can't identify. It may have been torn from the front of the craft when it crashed. It was about 1 square foot and an inch thick. It weighed almost nothing. It even weighed less than any plastic that I had seen of a similar size. I tried to scratch it with a pocket knife, and even cut away a small piece of the edge, but the knife did nothing to it." Here is Frank's account of his visit to see an alien artifact from Roswell. This story has never been published before. When the first newspaper stories of the Roswell crash came out, Frank was instantly intrigued. The first report said there had been a saucer crash, immediately followed by a statement declaring it was just a weather balloon. Frank asked himself, how could trained military observers mistake a small balloon for a metallic saucer? It sounded suspiciously like a cover-up. Several years later, Frank arranged to travel to Roswell to see some actual evidence from the crash. It had been taken from the ranch where the first ship crashed and changed hands several times before it ended up with another rancher in the Roswell area. The meeting to see the evidence had been challenging to organize. It was happening only because Frank knew someone who knew someone who knew the rancher. The contact assured the rancher that Frank was one of the good guys. Frank and his contact drove along an unpaved dirt road up to the ranch, which was miles outside of Roswell. It was a sweltering New Mexico day, and the car didn't have air conditioning. To keep a little bit cooler, they rolled down the car windows, but it didn't help. Red dust swirled through the car and over their clothes, leaving them still hot. But now they were dusty. At last, they saw a ranch house in the distance, surrounded by a few cottonwood trees. Stray cows grazed on the dry brown grass around the house. As they drove closer, Frank saw the rancher standing on his porch. After they got out of the car, they brushed off the dust and walked to the porch. The rancher looked Frank up and down as if trying to decide whether he was a government man. He finally shook hands, opened the screen door, and invited the two men to sit at the kitchen table. Like many local people, the rancher wasn't much for small talk, so after a brief introduction, the rancher reached into a stained dog-eared cardboard box on the floor under the table and pulled out something wrapped in a red bandana. Without saying a word, he carefully unfolded it on the kitchen table, exposing a small bright silvery object. Frank leaned forward but couldn't tell much about it from across the table. Without a word or change in facial expression, the rancher picked it up and handed it to him. The rancher said tersely, "It's from the ship." Intrigued, Frank took it from him carefully, as if he were handling a priceless Fabergé egg. The rancher noticed and smiled for the first time. "Don't worry. You can't break it. Nobody can. I tried a hacksaw and a hammer on it. Didn't make a scratch." The object was about 3 or 4 inches across and an inch thick with a half-inch hole in the middle. It was oddly cool to the touch, even though the air was hot. Frank thought it was made of some kind of metal, probably aluminum. It was shiny but with a slight semigloss. The part around the hole was plain, but the entire outer edge was decorated with dozens of curving wavy channels. Frank flipped over the object in his palm. Moving it close to his eyes, he saw no indication of marks from machine tooling or casting. All the edges were smooth and slightly rounded over. No sharp edges anywhere. Frank guessed it was a gear or knob of some kind. Then, the rancher held his fingers up in the air close together and said, "Grab it like this." He waited until Frank looked up. Now, tap it on the table. Lightly. Frank did that and was astounded to hear it ring like a tuning fork. The high-pitched ring was rich-toned and melodious. It died down after a few seconds. The rancher leaned forward and said, "Now, that's a sound from out of this world." Next, the rancher stared intently at Frank and said, "Now, I told you that this is just between us. You can't tell anybody about it until after I'm gone. And after my wife's gone too. Or they'll come after us." When Frank told this story to John, both the rancher and his wife had passed away long before. Frank said, "Sure. Of course," and then asked cautiously, "Who will?" The rancher said, "CIA, FBI, who the hell knows?" Not long after that ship came down, a rancher friend gave me this thing and said to hide it away. He didn't want the army to take it. He stared down at his hands. A week or so after that, 2 carloads of buttoned-down, spit-polished uptight guys showed up. You know. Suits. He almost spat the word out. His voice got quieter as he continued. They looked deadly serious. The tall one said, "If you got something, you'd better give it up now." I started to curse at him, but bit my tongue. Then, he got a mean look in his eyes and said, "I think you have a piece of something you shouldn't have. If you don't give it up, you, your wife, and little girl are going to get a one-way trip to the desert." Putting on my best poker face, I told him I didn't have anything, and so they could just head back out the way they came. They did, and I never saw them again. Once was too many.